In this video, we'll show you how to set up an analysis based on study-centric data. It will be composed of three parts. First, setting up the PICOs, the interventions and outcomes that will be used to set up the analysis. Second, adding result data within the studies. And third, setting up the analysis. We're using this review antibiotics for the common cold and acute purulent rhinitis as an example. So let's get started. The first thing we would do is we go to the PICO tab. Here you can see we have three tabs: interventions, outcomes, and covariates. These are all review level, so they are defined for the review. But for this video, we'll only add interventions and outcomes. And in this review, we want to look at antibiotics for common cold. So we click Add Interventions, and then we write antibiotics as the name. And for reference, we can write that any antibiotics is of interest. And we also, of course, want to add the control intervention, which in this case would be placebo. So now we find the interventions that we'll use, and now we want to look at what outcomes. And for this review, we're interested in the persistent symptoms after 7 days. That's what we want to base our analysis on. So what we do is we add the outcome, we give it the name persistent symptoms after 7 days. In the description, we could add what types of symptoms, for example, but we'll leave that for now. And of course, this should be a dichotomous outcome type we'll choose. The unit of measure is only relevant if we choose a continuous outcome. So now we've defined the PICOs for this review analysis. And the next step is to go to the included studies to add the result data. So we'll click on studies, then go to included studies, and we'll start adding result data for the first study. And so in real life, you might not have studies if you're starting from the beginning, but I've prepared here to make it a bit more fast. So we go into the study, and for now we're interested in adding the study arms and the result data. So that's what we'll look at now. So I go into the study arms, and this is where we describe the groups within the study, what arms were reported. So here we add antibiotics study. They had two different types of antibiotics versus placebo. So this is actually a 3-armed study, and the first antibiotic was Cybornol. And then we can add a second arm, which is also but this one is called tetracycline. And then, of course, we want to add the placebo, and here we can keep the default name. So now we've added the arms, and let's start adding the result data, because now we can choose which outcome we want to add a result for. So of course we want to add it for the outcome that we added, persistent symptoms after 7 days. Here you can now see the data table generated. So you can see that the study arms that we defined are here. and you can add events and totals. So for the placebo, we have 10 events and 22 total. For tetracycline, we have 4 events and 24 in total. And cybernol, we have 3 events and 22 in total. And so as review authors, you could, of course, combine these 2 arms yourself using, for example, the RevMan 5 calculator, but with study-centric data, RevMan Web will do this for you, so there's no need. And having it this way will show you the data that originally was reported in the study, which can be very useful to have. So now we've defined the PICOs, we've set up the study arms for one study and added result data. For us to actually see a useful analysis, we would need to add result data to more studies. So I'll pause the video and then magically more data will have been entered. So let's see if the data is there for the other studies now. So I just click next to see the data for the other studies, and as you can see, there is results for the other studies now, and these seem to be 2-arm studies. But now we've added the result data, we can go over to actually creating the analysis. So what we first need to do, we go to analysis, and then we need to add an analysis group that can contain the analysis for us. So we will call this antibiotics versus placebo, because that's what we want to look at. We can now click add an analysis, and we get the choice whether we want to base it on study data or custom, because we've entered all our data on our studies. We want to base it on study data. And so when we go here, we now are able to define the synthesis PICO. So which studies do we want to be eligible for the analysis? We want the studies to have reported results for this outcome, so persistent symptoms after 7 days. And then, of course, the comparison that we want to look at is antibiotics versus placebo. And we can probably give the analysis the name the same as the outcome, so persistent symptoms after 7 days. And so now we've defined the synthesis PICO. We've given it a name, and we'll use the default settings for the statistical part for now. And when you have defined the synthesis PICO, you can just click on the graph, and we'll identify the studies that are eligible and pull the results. So in this result, you can actually see that in HERN, the 2 arms that we looked at were pulled. So now you know how to set up an analysis with study-centric data. Thanks for listening.